What does a finding of probable cause that the Trump administration committed criminal contempt? What's the difference between criminal contempt and civil contempt? Do they both end up with somebody in jail? What happens to the pardon power of Donald Trump? These are all questions now being asked because for the first time in history, an administration, the Trump administration, has been found, at least by a judge, that it is more likely than not on probable cause finding that they committed willful disobedience of his order and criminal contempt. Judge Boesberg ordered that planes not be flown to El Salvador and their jails based on his temporary restraining order and preliminary injunction, and they were. And the fact that that order was later vacated by the Supreme Court doesn't matter. And now the judge has ruled. He's about to refer the case over to a special prosecutor. Maybe that could be somebody like Jack Smith. We talk about that, as well as civil contempt powers, only on Legal AF, the podcast. We do it twice a week, and here's a clip. Here comes the transition of a century. Judge Boesberg, Chief Judge of the District of Columbia, who he's not taking it anymore. Now, I had thought, you and I talked about this a couple of weeks ago. I said, with that Supreme Court decision that said on the Alien Enemies Act that Boasberg had gone a bit too far, that there was due process that people had that were sent to El Salvador to be in that horrendous, inhumane supermax prison in El Salvador. There was due process, but it took the form of a habeas corpus petition that had to be brought by individual prisoners in the United States. If they happen to be in the United States, unfortunately, 250 people not named Abrego Garcia are also in that jail, and they're kind of like shit out of luck. But all future people now have this declared right by the Supreme Court reinforced. And I thought, his whole, did you send the planes or didn't you send the planes thing from the Boasberg era? I'm thinking, well, maybe that's dead on jurisdictional grounds or on the fact that the order underlying it was found to be invalid. But I had forgotten, and Boasberg did a good job at a 46-page decision today to remind me that no, judges have inherent authority. And if they issue an order and you violate that order in real time, the fact that later on the order is vacated or somehow trimmed back by a higher court doesn't mean you have the right to violate the order, because no person can be the judge of themselves. You can't say, well, I think you're going to get overturned by an appellate court, so I'm just going to flout your order. That is exactly what you cannot do. So I was wondering what was going on in his courtroom. We hadn't heard about that contempt in a while. And this wasn't just, Karen, I want you to take it from there. This wasn't just civil contempt. This was criminal contempt with a referral under certain circumstances to prosecution, and then we'll pick it up from there. What did you tell everybody what happened, and then what do you think is going to happen based on the referral on prosecution?
I mean, this is kind of a huge deal, right? And we've talked about this before. Contempt is not something that certainly happens to most people. It's never happened to me. And most people don't even get close to the line of criminal contempt. And a lot usually happens before the word contempt even comes out of a judge's mouth. And so for this judge to go from 0 to 60 the way he has in such a short time is just absolutely fascinating. And frankly, it's so clear what Trump is doing, and whether it's in this case or it's the Abrego Garcia case, they're just they're not even pretending. They're just blatantly violating court orders and doing what they want and sending people to El Salvador. And in this particular case, what Judge Boesberg said is, look, there were a couple of planes that were sent despite my oral and written order, at least 2 airplanes, in direct violation of my order. And even though ultimately that the Supreme Court found that the order was that you have to do it in a different location, the habeas petition has to happen in the location where the body is, and said that ultimately the case has to be brought in a different jurisdiction. What he basically said, it doesn't really matter. The order is what the order is. And, he went from 0 to 60, and he basically said, I'm not satisfied with the answers here, so I want answers. And he gave a very short time period where he used some pretty, I think, some pretty strong language about what he expects. And if the Justice Department doesn't comply, he's going to hold them in contempt and ultimately send it for a criminal referral. Now,
I think just to clarify, he's found them in contempt already. It's probable cause that you have committed contempt. You have a way to purge your contempt. And that if you don't purge it, I want to know who the people are so I can refer to prosecution. I know there's been headline banners that have said we're on the way to contempt. We're beyond on the way. It's probable cause that they have been found in criminal contempt.
Right. Well, that's true. There's probable cause for contempt, but then there has to be an ultimate finding, right, to hold him in contempt. So I think you're right. But to be held in criminal contempt, you have to be more than just the initial probable cause. And the thing that's kind of tricky here is what happens when if they don't comply and if these things aren't the things aren't met the requirements, and essentially bring them back, and show me what happened. And he refers it to criminal contempt. And the thing is, a criminal referral is to the Department of Justice. Well, we know that's going to be fruitless. So then he can appoint a private prosecutor. Now, it's interesting because there's at least 2 justices on the Supreme Court who think that a private prosecutor in this type of scenario is actually illegal, and you can't do that. So that'll be interesting to see if that's upheld by the Supreme Court. But in a strange way, all of this is kind of pointless or fruitless because all Donald Trump has to do is pardon the people who have done this, and it kind of dissolves the contempt and the criminal contempt. So at the end of the day, this is really testing this unitary executive that the Supreme Court has created, allowing Trump to do whatever he wants and basically give the middle finger to the judiciary. Like I said, they're not even pretending. They're not even making excuses for these things. They are literally just saying, no, I can do whatever I want, and there's nothing you can do about it. And frankly, it's unclear if there's anything they can do about it, like I said, because he can pardon them. And the Supreme Court enabled this. They've created it. Indeed, I think they want it. It really sets the stage, not just for this presidency, but for future presidencies. And we are in a pivotal time period that we keep edging up towards the line, right? Well, what would happen here? And what's he going to do about it? No, what's he going to do about it? I mean, and Trump really, I think, ratcheted it up when he had Bukele come to the White House, and they both were basically, again, giving the middle finger to the courts and to the American people in front of everybody. They're not even pretending. And they just kind of say, no, we're not doing it. And you can't make me. So it's going to come to a head. I think the judge here is going to use and exercise every tool in his toolbox. And I think at the end of the day, we're really going to see what everybody's limits are. But that's where we are.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things I want to unpack there, and I want to read from aspects of Boasberg's decision since it is so powerful. He's already at purge. So for me, I think the contempt finding has already been made. I mean, whether you call it probable cause or you make another, there's no other finding that needs to be made. When you read his order, he has found that they've willfully disobeyed his order, and he's used the phrase probable cause, but there's no other step in federal court. They either purge next Wednesday, which is a term of art in contempt world, which means you cure or fix the thing that you're being found in contempt for, because there's nothing to purge if there's no finding of contempt. Or if you're not going to do that, then I'm taking names and I'm kicking ass. You tell me who the people are. Those people that are in contempt are known as contemnors. You tell me who the contemnors are. Those are the live human beings in the Trump administration, knowing of my order, that violated it anyway. And the order particularly was about 2 planes. The violation was about 2 planes that went anyway, even though the judge had ordered them to return. He's already established that in the record. That is it. And there's no amount of, as he said in his order, no amount of mea culpa at all, as you said, Karen, from this administration, who is brazenly violating all of our rights. It's not just Abrego Garcia or here the 2 plane load full of people that had constitutional rights that were violated. They're violating our rights and how they're interpreting what the American flag means. And that's why, as you said, this is pivotal. It's not, as we had Jamie Raskin on, and I did an interview with him with the Court Accountability Action people last week. It's not a constitutional crisis. That's such a hackneyed phrase. It almost has no meaning. Donald Trump is at war with the Constitution. And when you said it was fruitless because he'll just pardon, see, I think there is fruit. And the fruit is he'll have to expend in public, transparently, scarce political capital. And his political capital is getting scarcer and scarcer with how he's running the economy into the ground. And he's doing things that people didn't vote for him to do. I mean, how many people have we seen now who are now public on social media saying, I voted for this effing moron 3 times. I didn't vote for this fight on Abrego Garcia. I didn't vote for tariffs to destroy my business. I mean, it's just legion. And, podcasters, right-wing podcasters, he's starting to lose the Joe Rogan set. He's starting to lose the New York Post. I just read in the Post, because I like the sports section, the New York Post editorial board, which is led by, ultimately by Rupert Murdoch. The editorial board came out yesterday with an editorial that said, will you take the win on tariffs already? Sign a deal. Announce something, because the longer that you don't and you play this ridiculous cat and mouse game with the American economy, you're just playing into the hands of China. That's the New York Post. So when you start losing all of those things, so the scarce political capital comes into, sure, he can pardon and will likely pardon, but Boasberg and the federal courts are making him do that, so that is part of his body of work that we can then judge at the midterms, just like the Jan 6 pardons. Everyone's like, he's just going to pardon all these people. Sure, but now we can stand. Remember, when I say remember, that's just a rhetorical phrase. I don't really mean you have to remember this. At the midterms, there's no Biden, there's no Kamala. It's all Trump v. Trump. It's just Trump. It's thumbs up or thumbs down on Trump. It is a complete referendum on him. And all of these things for me, and the work that we do on Midas Touch and on Legal AF is part of that. I want to be the echo chamber for that. I want to be with you and Ben and the rest. I want to continue to aim heavy artillery, to continue the guns, phrases, metaphors we're using, on Donald Trump, so that when he stands up, or the people with R's next to their names stand up at the midterms, it's a very easy decision in the ballot box. Let me read to the audience, just for a moment, before we take our break, a couple of powerful lines from the judge's order just today. This is on page 1 of the order. Rather than comply with the court's order, that was to ground the planes, the government continued the hurried removal operation. Early on Sunday morning, this is a month ago Sunday, hours after the order issued, the government, transferred 2 plane loads of passengers protected by the temporary restraining order into a Salvadoran mega prison. The court ultimately determines, that's a determination, a finding, that the government's actions on that day demonstrate a willful disregard for its order, sufficient for the court to conclude that probable cause exists to find the government in criminal contempt. Because it's criminal, it now goes to a prosecutor to investigate and prosecute the case and meet its burden. But the finding has already been made by this civil judge, if you will, under the federal rules of criminal procedure and the other rules that govern contempt. I
have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
Why do you think he did criminal contempt and not civil contempt? And just to remind people, civil contempt is to basically require someone to comply and to do something, knowing the futility of criminal contempt in this case. If the whole point is to return the planes and return the people, why didn't, what he could do? Because here, the reason I guess I'm unclear about whether or not there has to be more for the contempt is there's no people. Like who's he holding in contempt? I mean, he's waiting to see who the people are. And so I just think that he's taking testimony and depositions, and he's going to figure out who did what when, and then I would think he'd do the finding.
The contempt has been found. The contempt has been found. Who's in contempt is next Wednesday.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I've never seen it done backwards like that. I've always thought, whatever.
But to answer your question, your question was why. I said the same thing on my hot take analysis. I said, normally, I've been involved with a handful of contempt proceedings. It starts at civil, sort of progressive discipline. I'm going to find you in civil contempt. Here's how you get out of it. You do the following. You turn over the money. You turn over the property. You stop doing this. You have to have the keys to your purge in your pocket, as we say in law school parlance. And if you don't, then it's hard to find somebody in contempt. Like if they don't have the money, pay $1 million by tomorrow. Like if they had no ability to do that, that's actually an illegal contempt finding. And then you ratchet it up. If they don't do that, you go to criminal contempt. It just shows you that from the record and given the constitutional stakes, the judge doesn't have to, under the federal rules of criminal procedure and the prevailing statute in this area, he does not have to start at civil. He can go right to criminal. And I know he wanted to end his order. Let me read to the end of the order, then we'll talk about more when we come back. At the end of his order, after he goes through all of the findings, let me go to page 14 for a minute. He said on page 14, defendants provide no convincing reason to avoid the conclusion that appears obvious from the factual recitation. They deliberately flouted this court's written order and separately its oral command that explicitly delineated what compliance entailed. They don't dispute it. They don't offer a mea culpa. They don't want to rectify it. They are in violation. And then at the end, because I think the answer to your question is right here at the end of the order, because he wanted to be able to write the following sentence on page 46. For the foregoing reasons, the court will find probable cause that defendant's actions constitute contempt. In other words, he's effectively indicted them for contempt. Now it's up to a prosecutor to take it from there. It will provide them an opportunity to purge such contempt. If they, the administration, opt not to do so, the court will proceed to identify the contemnors, the live people, and refer the matter for prosecution, a separate order. We haven't seen the separate order yet, but that's coming.
Right,
that's
but
he wanted to write that.
But criminal prosecution is potentially futile because they can pardon anybody. That's why I'm saying, why not put them in jail for criminal contempt? I guess Trump can. Well,
you can't put him in jail for civil. Wait. Let me unpack this because you might be onto something. Because I thought this too. Why isn't he using his powers to put somebody into jail directly? And why is he referring it over for criminal prosecution?
Exactly.
That's a good question. That's a good question.
Yeah, that's what I didn't understand. Start putting them in jail until they comply.
State court judges certainly can do it. You know that well. I don't know if I have to look closer. I haven't been involved with a federal criminal contempt order, thank God. Neither on defending somebody or otherwise. So I don't know, but we will by the time we could, maybe on the weekend. So you're telling me
he can't put them in jail under a civil contempt to require compliance?
I don't think so. I don't think he can get to jail. I think he can get to a lot of things.
If they refuse to testify, if somebody refuses, at least in state court, and this is something I'd love us to research and come back to.
We will.
Because in order to compel, for example, testimony, or to turn over documents, or to compel, which is what civil contempt typically is, jail is a tool that can be used.
Yeah, agreed. You and I agree on that, and that's usually how we understood it. But we won't have time to do it tonight, but we promise everybody, because that's our commitment to you, that we will get to the bottom of this little arcane area of the law when it comes to federal criminal contempt. I have to assume Chief Judge Boesberg knows how to do it. So he's probably following it by the book, but we will continue to follow that. Now, the reason we chop this full-length podcast up into clips like that is for a number of reasons. One, not everybody has time to invest an hour into a podcast, even one as amazing as Legal AF. We are in the top 10 in the world in all podcasts, and that's because of you. Now, look, with your help, we'll actually get even higher. The Midas Touch Brothers podcast is number one, and we like to be right in the same room with them in the top 5 and pass a lot of MAGA right-wing podcasts along the way. With your help, we will. So you can listen to the podcast on all audio podcast platform. You can watch the podcast and do both. We do it Wednesdays and Saturdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on the Midas Touch Network. And take that clip, send it off to people in your life, and ask them to join us as we continue to grow both the Legal AF podcast and the Legal AF YouTube channel There it is. Legal AF YouTube channel, Legal AF MTN, in collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, as we continue to grow that channel to about 1 million people before our 1-year anniversary. And that's all on you. So until my next reporting, I'm Michael Popok. In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories at the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.